You look lovely. How you doing?
Oh, thank you. Likewise. I'm good. I'm okay. How are you?
I'm good. I think the last time we talked was when you were doing Bent,
Yes.
and we talked
Yes.
about that, and we had no idea that you were gonna do a play about the Holocaust, and then right after that, the whole world was gonna end.
Yep.
So how was that for you?
The
How did that
pandemic
go?
or
But just like I mean, I don't know if anybody who watches this show or listens to it before, they only know you from that one episode. So you did the play. How'd the play go?
Mhm.
Pretty good.
It went incredibly well. I was utterly surprised in a good way by the turnout. We sold out most of the shows, and yeah, I mean, I feel incredibly lucky that we managed to get all the performances out and everyone got paid and everything, all the I's dotted and T's crossed before the pandemic hit. Cause I know a lot of people were just getting ready, to film something or get their thing produced. So I'm very grateful that all worked out. But yeah, I mean, it was wild. There were little kind of whisperings of it. I remember the actors coming in and talking about how there's no masks anywhere and they're out of hand sanitizer and kind of that sense of like, is this going to be really bad? But
Right.
I honestly was just so caught up in Bent and everything that I just couldn't even like think about it. But
It's almost good that you had a distraction going into the chaos because, man, it was crazy when it started.
Yeah, it was terrifying.
Especially being in New York. Goodness gracious.
Yeah. It felt like being in a movie. I remember just thinking like there's no like this can't actually be happening.
I've lived there a couple of times, and it's not really for me to live there. I love to visit, but I have to say, when the pandemic happened, I was a little bummed that I wasn't there, only because,
Really?
yeah, because it's the only chance you would ever get to see some of those places in New York totally empty.
Yeah.
Like Times Square had like no people in it.
Yeah.
That's a unique experience.
I did like that.
Yeah, dude. It was like when driving around
yeah.
LA and stuff, it was like no traffic. It was like weird as hell, but
yeah,
kind of dope.
Yeah. I mean, that was definitely something to be enjoyed of all the horror that it was.
Yeah, you gotta find your silver linings. Sometimes that's no people.
Yeah. Yeah, that was nice. I remember going with my partner down to like the very bottom of Manhattan, and I had only been there when it was full of tourists. And I was like, ugh, this place is horrible. But we went there one day and no one was there, and it was so beautiful and nice. And I mean, it was still really weird, but yeah, it was nice.
That's awesome. Well, we only did like a mini episode when you were on the show. We were talking about the play, like really specifically. I kind of like went back over some of those Bent episodes, like, I don't know, like a year ago. And some of the people that I talked to from the show, we ended up talking about different stuff, but you and I like really talked about the play. That was like a really, the substance of it. So, which is great, because that means this time I can talk about you.
Great.
And I don't know a lot about you.
I'm so sorry to do this. Can I pause just really quick?
Yeah.
There's like a thing that's happening that I need to take care of really quick. Sorry. Okay.
Handle the thing that's happening. I'll give myself this visual cue. It's around when this is happening.
Sorry. We have a phantom toilet that sometimes just starts flushing all by itself and it won't stop until you take care of that. So, yep.
And how does one take care of a haunted toilet?
You just flush it, but it will just like go and go because it's all connected. I don't know. It's kind of creepy, but
it needs a human interaction before it resets.
Yes.
It's kind of a needy, desperate toilet you're dealing with over there.
Yeah.
So just deal with yourself, you know?
Yeah, she's a cranky toilet.
All right. Well, the joys of living in an old city.
Indeed.
The only question I have, Emma, that I ever ask anybody that I plan ahead of time really is, where are you from? I mean, I kind of know the answer to this, but not really.
I'm from Atlanta, Georgia.
And how did you like that?
I like the city of Atlanta itself a lot. I was born there, but I spent the first chunk of my childhood in Marietta, Georgia, which is like a suburb outside of Atlanta. And I didn't love that. I think it has changed a lot in recent years, which makes me excited. But
You lived in
at
the
the
suburbs until you were how old?
until I was, I think, 13.
So then you moved like into Atlanta proper to go to high school and shit?
Yeah. Yeah.
How
It
was
was like
that?
amazing. It was so good. I was very fortunate enough to go to a really great it was kind of like the equivalent of a liberal arts college, but a high school.
Sure.
It's called Paideia. And yeah, it's just a really great private school where you get to explore arts and learn lots of stuff. And they really emphasize kind of critical thinking and exploring different interests and stuff. So that was amazing. And I'm so grateful that I had that for high school, because like, yeah, I was definitely the ugly duckling for most of my upbringing in Marietta. So it was nice getting to kind of be like, oh, here are my people.
Do you mean that figuratively or literally? Like you thought you were an unattractive young child, or you thought they're just not my group?
Unfortunately, both. Yeah. I mean, it just makes me sad to think that. But yeah, I mean, I just didn't look like anybody that I grew up around. Everybody, like the ideal beauty at the time was like, and it was also, like the early 2000s. So it was like super, super skinny, straight,
Right.
stick straight, like blonde hair, very kind of like small features. Yeah.
You're brunette, but you're not like a big girl.
Thanks. I know. I just, I have like a normal female body.
Right.
Yeah.
It was kind of that heroin chic thing going on.
Oh yeah.
It
and
was
I mean,
like,
I'm sure
you gotta
it's
be
like
too skinny.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure it's like massive amounts of body dysmorphia and stuff, but
Sure.
Just, yeah.
But then you found regular shaped weird girls in Atlanta.
I guess so. Or just people that cared about things that mattered. That was nice. I mean, it was a very socially conscious school. So I feel like in many ways they were kind of ahead of a lot of things that are now like super popular. Like there was like an LGBTQIA club that I was a part of. I was like the president of the green team. Like they're really into recycling and the environment. And they have like a day where they talk about like racial issues. And there's a lot of classes that are just very much geared toward like, I don't know, just kind of taking in the world and making sure that you're not just the recipient of privilege, but you're actually using that privilege to do something and to change the world. Actually, like John Ossoff went to Paideia. So like, that's kind of, I feel like he's like the kind of a product of that environment for sure.
He's the guy that ran for,
Senator.
Remind me? Yes.
With Warnock,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember this. So it was a very socially progressive school, and you've been living in the like Red County suburbs of Georgia, which we've all been paying a lot of attention to in the last like 6 or 7 years, especially. Yeah. So you got a big switch in that. I mean, your dad, which I guess we should drop if people haven't listened to the other episodes or whatever, but your dad's also an alum of School of the Arts. And he's done this show before. But he's a pretty progressive dude. So you had that in the house.
Thank God,
You weren't finding it at school until you moved to Atlanta for high school.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, both of my parents are very liberal. My mom's kind of like hippie dippy liberal. And my dad, I mean, he's Canadian, but like very much liberal Democrat kind of thing. But yeah, it was kind of the thing where like, I don't know. I think there may be like 2 other people that thought, I don't even know if there were, like it was very kind of hush hush. I remember my dad made like a sign for our yard that it was like a picture of a bush with like an X around it, because he was too afraid to actually say like
have a John Kerry sign or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was, it's kind of, it's been weird watching what's happened in the past, handful of years play out, because it was very much my everyday life. Like I've kind of forgotten that there were people that had such extreme views, because I'd been in kind of like a little liberal bubble. But yeah, it was kind of and even just watching like Georgia become such an important part of the political landscape, which it really hasn't been in recent past. That's just been kind of interesting to watch.
Yeah, it's the new Florida. Florida is not just Republican, and Georgia's the one now where every single election we're like, oh man, what the fuck is going to go on over there?
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, I feel like it's really changing, and I do think that having the film industry and TV industry that's blown up there, I think that's been a big contributing factor for sure.
Which we can thank the fools in the North Carolina legislature for giving a huge boost to that. A lot of people who don't know about that, for the longest time, there was a tremendous tax incentive in the state of North Carolina to film stuff. That's why a lot of stuff happened in like Wilmington and Asheville and like all over the place. And then while we were in school, actually, I don't know, were you there when they did that?
I can't remember. I think it was somewhere around there.
It was somewhere around that time. Like it was about 10 years ago, give or take. But Atlanta's always had a great film and especially television, production hub. It's been one for a long time, but it like doubled because North Carolina didn't renew their tax incentive. And so all the people picked up their shit and moved 2 states over. And it got a lot more blue. For sure. Yeah. I feel like that's just part of what's happened as well, because a lot of that industry's gone over there. Yeah. It's weird. I want to talk about the thing that you mentioned before, because I definitely had that experience too. And I think as someone, I grew up in a red suburb of a blue city like you, but in Texas. So less of a swing, but definitely in Austin that like, we're right on the border of people who are not open-minded, but we're surrounded by them. And if you just go to school like 30 minutes out of the city, you get a totally different experience growing up than if you do. And then we both went to School of the Arts around the same time, which is like super socially, culturally progressive, like little island in the middle of a very purple city that's like very split. And then you move to New York, which is again very blue. And so I find it very interesting that you kind of say the quiet part out loud that a lot of people I feel like that we are friends with don't talk about, which is like we've been almost accidentally training our brains to forget about a lot of the people in the country that we live in that don't participate in this like arts first, socially forward, culturally progressive, which is great. It's all that stuff is great. I support those values. But like, I know that for me being in Austin during the pandemic was like maybe the second time other than like the Trump election that it was like loud to me. I was like, wow, there is a difference in the way culturally people are feeling in different places. And it was it was like being weirdly spoiled to be at School of the Arts and be in that bubble where everybody's like, well, we all get rights. Like we start there, right? Like we all get rights and you get to do what makes you happy and shit like that. That was like assumed.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting going from my high school paideia to School of the Arts because I feel like in many ways, yes, it was very progressive, but in a lot of ways, I feel like I interact at UNCSA. I met people who came from very different backgrounds, even if they were in the arts. I remember getting mad at some people for like not voting. Mm-hmm. And that was such a baffling thing for me that someone wouldn't vote because I loved to vote. And yeah, I think I agree though. Like, I think when a lot of time is spent in a little bit of a bubble, I sometimes forget that everyone doesn't think the same way as I do, which I know is incredibly ignorant. I feel like that's kind of part of the bigger issue here with social media, with just how polarized everything has gotten. Cause like, it is uncomfortable to talk to people or be friends with people or interact with people that have very different views. But
do you feel that way?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. It depends on the issue, but in general, I find it, it depends what we disagree on, but on things that are very basic, like human rights, and respect for individuals, it's very hard for me to understand the other side, but I also know like I'm a really big fan of Brene Brown, and she always talks about like when we're divided, it's easier to dehumanize the other, and that's when real problems have, because once people start being dehumanized, that's when real horror can be committed because it doesn't feel as bad.
Right, because they're not people.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's concerning to me, and I have family members, like extended family members, that are very much off the deep end, in my opinion. And I don't know. And it's also a mental health thing where it's like, I don't know how much of a point there is to engage. But yeah, but there were certain things about UNCSA that I feel like weren't as progressive as maybe I had expected, because it is an art school, which was interesting to kind of come up against. I don't know. I mean, just kind of things that people would say casually, jokes that people would say that I felt were not okay to say. I feel like now probably people wouldn't make those jokes because of what's been going on the past couple of years. I feel like people are becoming much more aware of themselves and what's okay and what's not. Recycling, everyone smoking on campus, that was like a big thing to get used to for me. Yeah, I mean, it's just different. And even like New York, I feel like there's certain things about New York that are super progressive, but also you have so much concentrated wealth here. And so you also do have a lot of, kind of more conservative values that people don't necessarily realize it's all around, I mean, the whole state of New York is pretty red, and recycling here is like a whole thing of like, some people are like, we don't even do it here. It's all fake. I don't know. There's a lot of kind of juxtaposed things here where it's like super progressive on one side and then like super not on the other side. And I don't know. I definitely think like the part of Atlanta that I grew up in was very much a little progressive bubble.
Do you think when you got to school, and you found those more, those other things that people were doing that weren't what you were used to, just put it that way, not to put it on a spectrum, but like, did that give you the sense of like, oh, wow, these people are behind? Or did it give you a sense of like, more people need to, like, we should let people do what they want to do. And if they're doing what they're doing, it doesn't mean they're like better or worse or anything. They're just doing something different. Or was it the first thing?
That's a good question. I would have to say at the time, probably the first. I think
like one of my also, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of my like toxic traits is being really stubborn and kind of holding very tightly to my values, and then kind of thinking I'm better than people, which is not good. I definitely think I've worked on that a fair amount. So I do feel like I'm less rigid, but I think at the time it was very much like there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And like my worldview is like way ahead of you. And in some ways, I know this is going to sound bad, but in some ways I think I was right, because a lot of conversations that have been had in the past 2 years, I'm like, yes, like, of course you can't say that. Of course you can't do that. Like, so I don't know. Yeah. In some ways I felt like it was a little bit behind where I thought things should be.
It's very self-aware, but I also think it's interesting that the two examples you just gave of like the things you were like, that you got right at, like you were like ahead of your time, were both, at least in the vague terms you put them, like restrictive. Like you were like, you can't do this and you can't say that, was the things people came around on, not like things you could do or things you should do. It sounds like there is a little bit of edge to you that wants to like kind of curb other people's not helpful behaviors.
Maybe. I don't know.
It's okay.
And I mean, I guess
that's an okay impulse to have. It comes from a very understanding place that I don't doubt starts with empathy, for sure.
I hope so. I mean, I guess if I were to look at the positive side of it, there were a lot of things, I guess particular maybe like gender roles or like what a woman can or cannot do. I feel like I took for granted, where it's like, but of course. And then I would come up against like, oh, this little tiny box is where we're supposed to fit. Like, what?
Like, do you mind if I ask an example on that?
Sure.
It's very interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, And I think I'm still kind of discovering this, of course. And I think, things that have come up just socially the past couple of years, I'm continuing to kind of question that. But I just feel like at school, there was like this very outdated, rigid idea of what an actress should look like. Lots of comments about bodies and so much emphasis put on them staying small and staying fit. And
this is all very much from the faculty in your experience, or this is more of
I
each
think
other?
Just across the board. Like, and I don't blame the faculty for that. I think that's just what it was like. I think the whole body positivity movement is so new,
Sure.
That wasn't even a thing. The idea that someone like Ashley Graham could be a model was so like crazy at that time, which is kind of wild because it wasn't that long ago.
Right.
So I do think in many ways the faculty was just trying to help us fit into the industry as best they could, knowing what the industry is. And I think, of course, there's so much further we need to go, but I do feel like a lot of progress has been made in terms of just kind of opening, just widening what's possible and what's considered good or cool or attractive or successful.
Right.
I think a lot more people have opportunities that didn't even like 10 years ago, which is crazy.
Yeah, for sure. That's true. Which is great.
Yes.
Like, that's a great thing. I think you're right. I think one of the things that, we also have to keep in mind anytime, I talk to people on this show who went to school when you did, obviously when you graduated, Carl was the dean, but you really were accepted into the end of a 20-year era of Gerald's program, which was very much built for an industry that wasn't really around anymore. The business didn't really work the way that it does now, even at the end. And which is amazing in a way because, I'm very grateful of it. And I think there's other parts of the school outside of even the drama program that function this way, which is there is a tremendous benefit to a more classical approach to education and saying like, learning how to juggle is not something you're going to learn at every theater program in America. You're just not. And some of them are like, how many roles are you going to fucking juggle? Like, how many is that even a thing? It's like, well, it's not about that. It's about learning a basic skill set, and your brain does something when it learns how to juggle that now it knows how to do from now on. And it's kind of like unlocking different parts of your brain. But there's other stuff where it's like we used to have one woman for every two men in every drama class.
Yep.
But that wasn't because they just like loved men. It was because they were casting for an industry and a business that for the longest time had two men in every play for every woman that was in it. If you're lucky, it's more like 3-1, but we can't have a 3-1 drama program or we won't be able to do any fucking scenes. But yeah, we had to do Chris and Ann scenes where every Ann's got two Chris's because that was like that was the ratio of what they were trying to do. So I think it's going to be a little bit of both, and there's a benefit to both. And I always say on this show, I can't speak to what's going on over there now. It's a whole different world, which it had to be. The old one ended. So I'd be fascinated to find out like really what's going on over there. So you feel like you're living in the like a progressive bubble in Atlanta during high school, and then you go to North Carolina where it's like a B+ in progressive. Let's put it in Emma's scale.
I don't know if I want to like rate it, but it was just
come
like
down
yes
from the A-
no.
of Atlanta to the B+ of North Carolina. And then what happens when you go to New York? Did you know you were going to go there right away? Was there any incentive or any thought to like go back to Atlanta since that's where you're from and there's work?
I thought about it. I was very much in the mindset of like New York or LA because I feel like that's what we were kind of told and that's what most people were doing. I really did not like LA. So I knew it's a vibe thing. I don't know. That's
such an LA reason.
I know. I just thought of that when I said that, but
like I don't fit in LA. It's not my vibe, bruh.
I just don't, bro. Like, yeah, it's weird. I don't know. I wanted to like it, and I love that people love it, and the people that I know who are loving it.
Was it a people thing? Was it a weather thing? Was it just driving
like
around what you saw? Like what? I'm very curious in this. Like, no, I mean it because people who are, there are plenty of people who go to like a School of the Arts or Carnegie Mellon or whatever. One of these not in the middle of New York and LA schools that train you to go to New York and LA. And there's a few people who go to those schools who are from New York and LA. I don't care what their opinions are about it because they're biased as shit. What fascinates me is kids like you and me who are from more of the middle of the country, maybe even the South, then we go to a place like School of the Arts and hear nothing but New York and LA for 4 fucking years plus. Then we are left to choose like red pill, blue pill. What do we do? And who goes where is fascinating to me. It might be one of the reasons I do this show because I want to know what is it. And a lot of it I don't think is the cities. A lot of it I think is the people. I think it's a lot scarier for Pickles to go to LA because there's less of us and we feel less connected out here, which is true. And not just because of the numbers, but because of the way the city is set up. So that's a thing. But a lot of that's like the people, like all my friends are going to New York, so I go there. Sure. But there is also a thing, and I could talk, go listen to my old podcast. I could talk for 10 hours about why I don't want to live in New York City. I won't make this episode about that. But I can articulate it very clearly. I've done a lot of time in both. What was it with your limited time? You just came out for Showcase?
Yeah.
Okay. So you spent 5 days here?
Yeah. Or no, I think it was 7 days.
7 days.
Just a week.
A full calendar week. What in a week's time did LA do to hurt you so bad, Emma Coulter?
Well, that's a lot to unpack. So,
sure.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure a lot of it had to do with people. I mean, most people from my class, I think, moved to New York.
Right.
And it's just closer. It's closer to Atlanta. And I've been to LA a couple of times, I think, just like growing up and stuff. It's a multitude of factors, I would say.
Did you ever come out here with your dad, like when he was working?
No, I don't. Not when he was working. I think for like a vacation or something. We did. But one thing that I know sounds stupid, maybe.
No, go.
It's too sunny. It's just too sunny. Like my people are not meant to have that much sun all the time.
Can you be clearer about your people?
My fair-skinned, freckly people. Yeah.
Scotch Irish just, kind of.
I think I thrive in a place that is like cloudy, sometimes sunny every now and then. I mean, even in New York, I like bathe in sunscreen. And so it was just a lot. It was just like hot and sunny all the time.
And you came in May.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been out there since then.
Or March. No, you would have come in March.
Yeah. I've gone out there a few times and I just, every time I want to love it. And every time I'm just like, that's a hard no for me.
As someone who has lived in New York and LA, and I love New York, and so many of my very best friends and favorite people live there, and I haven't been able to see them in a long time because of it. I get it. And anytime I ask people how they feel about one or the other is only curiosity. I have like no defense of LA or like, I want more people to move here or like, how come you don't like the one I like? I don't give a shit. Live where you want to live 100%. Yeah. And I only really feel that because like if New York wasn't New York, I'd live there.
Yeah.
The company I work for now is based off of like, it's on like fucking like in Bryant Park. It's like in the middle of New York. And it would be easier for me in a lot of ways to live there. And so many of my friends, but it's a vibe, man. I'm fucking vibe over there.
It's just a vibe. Every time I've been to LA, like there's like I know this might sound very hippy dippy, but like for me, there's an ungrounded energy that is psychologically disturbing. Like every time I've been there, I just have like weird dreams and weird thoughts and feelings, and I don't know what it's about, but it's just like
that's how I feel about New York. Exactly.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I know people who cannot live in New York, and I get it. I mean, I really get it. But honestly, the best.
I had the feeling I'm like, everybody just relax. Like that's how I feel when I'm in New York. And like everybody,
it's very
people on the
stressful.
street, the people I finally get to where I'm going and I'm with people, I'm like, can everybody just, it's a lot. It's everybody just bring it down. We need
I think
some
that's what I love
legal
about it.
marijuana.
Yeah, I think I love the intensity. It's so intense. But it feels like a grounded intense where I feel like one thing I like about New York versus, say, Atlanta, and I did live in Atlanta for about a year post graduation, like a couple years ago. But there's something about, and maybe you've experienced this also kind of being in, I'm not sure what Texas is like, but also North Carolina, where there's kind of this like fake friendliness where you have to say hi to people you don't know. Like if you're on a hike, you're like, hey, how's it going? That I don't like. And maybe that makes me weird and antisocial, but like I like that there's a really hard exterior in New York, and it's something that took me a while to get used to. But I feel like people don't bullshit you here, and they're very honest and to the point, which I feel like the longer I've lived here, the more I appreciate this. And there's kind of like a toughness that I really appreciate. Yeah. But honestly, the best advice I got, I can't remember who it was, but some guest came to talk to us when we were out there for Showcase. And he said, pick the city that you'd like to be unemployed in.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds jaded, but it's true, where it's like, you know,
that's a great idea.
Even if
because
you're
you will
be. Yeah. And the thing is, like, I think there's so much fear around that, but it's just part of being an artist. Like, even if you're incredibly, wildly successful, you're going to have weeks or months even where you're not on a project, or you're waiting for your next project, or you're preparing for the next project. And I think so much of school, because it is kind of like from dawn till dusk, which I loved and thrived off of. But, you know, life isn't like that. You have to live somewhere and put roots down. And so I like that advice of like, oh yeah, what city do I want to live in? Not just like opportunity, you know?
It's the best advice. And I think it's also a reason why I think I left New York, is because I think I was afraid of one day not having a job and living there, because if I had the job I have now, I could afford to live there. Like I finally have enough money to afford to live there, and I couldn't want to live there any less. And my job is in that city, like technically, even though I work remote. So it would be incredibly simple, but it's all added up to like, it's just not where I want to be. But I think you're totally right, because no matter what, and this is true too, not just from like how do I want to spend my free time, which is, I know, not only how you meant it, but kind of what you hear when someone says that, right? They're like, wait, you know, when you're unemployed, you'll want to live there. Okay, well, what does that mean? I want to pick a city that when I don't have anywhere to be and I have my unemployment check rolling in and I need to chill, but I also want to not stay in the house all day. Where do I want to be for that? And that's true. But here's the other thing. When you're in that mental state, when you're unemployed, that's a thing too. Not just what you want to go do and hang out. It's a very specific mental state to be in between gigs when you're a gig worker, not know when the next one is, and watching the fucking savings account tick down because you're like, fuck, I better get a fucking thing. I can imagine that sentiment of whoever the guest is who gave you that advice. I'd be talking about that. Not just like, would you rather go to the beach or the park? Like, no. That's not what I'm talking about. When you are thinking about quitting this shit because it is fucking you up, where is going to nurture you the best? Either push you to quit because you should, or keep you from being like, this is a garbage life I don't want to live. Like, and for me to answer that question is part of why I live in LA. When I'm not working and I'm out here, the sunshine, as much as I'm more like you, I like the little gloom. I like the fucking rain a lot. I really do. I prefer it. Too much sunshine, I get a little depressed. But the sunshine is better for me when I'm not well. And I think that's why I do well in it. And I want to talk about the other thing that you said about the fake niceness in the South thing that also kind of exists in LA. I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
You know what the difference is, I think, largely between, and you might have had a different experience in Atlanta, but I've lived all over the South, Texas, My family lives all over Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, all over the South. And then North Carolina is kind of like this too. The difference between that and out in LA is the fakeness that I feel like you put on it as you describe it is very much an LA thing because they don't really give a shit.
Yeah.
When they're like, hey buddy, how you doing? All right, great, whatever. They don't, you don't need to answer because they don't really care. I've found mostly in the South, even though not everyone's trying to talk to you for 45 minutes, some of them are. And a lot of that is genuine. They're really like, how you doing, man? You doing pretty good? I'm doing pretty good. You're doing pretty good. We're doing pretty good. All right. Do. Like it's real. And so I don't hate it in the South. When people are nice in the South and they're like waving on their porches and shit, I kind of like that. That feels a little bit to me like, hey, we're all doing our best and we're all out here. But that's also because I like, I'm white and I'm I'm a bisexual dude, but I mostly date women, so no one knows. It's very easy for me. And that's probably part of why I dig the openness. I'm not worried about anybody fucking with me. If they seem nice and they're talking to me, I dig it. I loved that about North Carolina. People sit on the porches and like wave and when you walk by, and I don't like that about New York. It's so interesting to hear this, that you dig that. You like to just like put on the hazmat suit and walk around like in your own world.
Yeah. And I mean, I think in terms of that, like street harassment in New York is unmatched. So I don't like that for sure. But I guess, I don't know, I'm an introvert and I don't like stranger interactions are very draining for me. But I do have to say, I do like how in the South, if someone asks, how are you doing? Like even at CVS, like they actually want to know how you're doing. And I do appreciate that because I feel like in New York, there's none of that. It's just like, you actually are like, oh, excuse me, do you mind if I like give you money and you give me a service? And like, I feel like there's kind of like this detached feeling.
Do you think that street harassment shit is related to the fact that other than that, most of the social environment is closed off? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's like the other side of not the other side of the coin, but it's kind of like the residual slime coming off of a different thing. That's fine. But part of the grossness that comes along with everyone gets to be in their own little world is there are some people who are like, how about fucking you're not in your own world? And I'm like telling you, like, it's like it almost feels like a rebellion against the fact that it looks like in New York, when you walk around, men, women, everybody, they just want to be like with their book and doing like, okay, like most people look like they just want to get to where they're going and not be bothered. And so there's this like fake alpha bravado shit that comes out to take advantage of the fact, almost like how the bully always picks on the quiet kid. Like, why don't you just pick on a regular kid? It's like, no, I'm picking on the quiet kid because he wants me not to bother him. Look, he wants to just sit in the corner and read his book in the cafeteria and not be bothered. And so that's exactly who I'm going to go up and be like, hey, you reading something? Like, I think it's related to like it. Never have you seen so many women who don't want to be bothered, who just want to get to where they're going. And that's like too much for some guys who are like, you're not getting where you're going today, sweetheart. It's going to be a problem. Like, I don't know. It's fascinating to me because I've never thought in my life, let me yell some shit to a girl. It's never occurred to me. Right. Well, I'm not looking for a medal, but I'm saying like, I'm fascinated by the guy who makes that call. Where is that coming from psychologically?
I mean, I have no idea. I don't think it's a New York specific issue though. I mean, it's other places,
but
everyone
New York
I know has been like yelled at. I mean, in Atlanta, it's weird because you'll get yelled at from like moving cars and shit, which is terrifying.
Right.
To your point of like, you don't feel the threat. I think, like as a woman.
Yeah, why would I?
I feel scared. Like anytime someone I don't know is like trying to interact with me. So I think in the South, it feels scary. And then there's kind of this like, oh, I'm going to pretend to be friendly, but I don't really want to talk to you kind of a thing. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the street harassment is about in New York. I love again, so much pain and horror during the pandemic times. But one little silver lining that I liked was being fully covered. Like I loved having a mask, especially in the wintertime, got the hat on, got the hood up, long coat kind of thing.
Did it help with that?
Oh yeah.
So you think if they can't see your face, or is it that they didn't know you're pretty?
I don't think it's about any of that. Like I know people, like I don't know what's going on psychologically for these dudes, but like there's nothing to prevent it. Like I personally have looked horrible and had like really baggy clothes and had things yelled at me, and I've looked fat,
of course.
And the same,
we don't
I don't think it matters about even like if someone's attractive or not. I think it's more of a power thing. I think it's like any sort of sexual violence. It's a verbal assault, and I think it's all about power and control. I don't think it's necessarily about like, oh, if only you didn't do this, then that wouldn't happen, But
no,
there is like
I'm not saying that at all. I'm just
I'm not
asking,
saying you're saying that. Yeah.
I'm not. We don't need to go down the victim blaming road. That's not what I'm saying at all.
No,
and you know that. But what I'm asking is you said being fully covered up during the pandemic to where you're just like almost like a like a hijab level of people seeing you. Why do you think that had the effect it did on the catcalling and the stuff? Was it just the pandemic, people stopped doing that shit? Or did you find that wearing something extra helped cut down on the amount of people yelling shit at you?
Honestly, I think it was probably because it was less clear if I was a woman or not. Because I'm pretty tall. And if it's like a baggy coat and I have a hat and a thing, then maybe they didn't know.
Interesting.
I don't know. It's more of like a blob, I think, than like a person. So I don't know.
That's kind of, I know this is crazy, and I very much am a progressive person who's just very curious, but that is kind of the argument in the Muslim faith, is it not? I'm not an expert on that, but it does seem like the attitude is like, keep it an amorphous blob that's not sexualized at all, and then it can't be sexualized at all. And then there's some safety there. I think that's
I don't know.
Idea.
I think I don't know. I am not Muslim, and I don't know many Muslim people who wear a full covering, but my issue with that isn't it like puts the responsibility on the person rather than the person who can't control themselves.
Exactly. It's like the fucking the shorts and stuff in middle school.
Yeah.
Like girls can't be wearing shorts because the boys, let's be clear, won't be able to do math.
Yeah, will be distracted or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I feel like that really puts the focus away from the issue.
Agreed. It's kind of like the literal interpretation of sweeping it under the rug. It's like we're not dealing with what the real issue is here. We're saying if we put a giant rug over this thing, we won't have to deal with it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really taking the focus away from the problem and who's responsible. And people obviously take that argument then to like the worst scenarios of like, well, if only they XYZ, or asking like, well, what did you do? Or, oh, they shouldn't be walking around the street at night or whatever. And it's like,
right. All that victim blaming bullshit.
Yeah. Or you shouldn't have had this or you shouldn't have that. And like, there's tons of stuff going around where like, it just talks about like all the things to try and prevent it. And then even if you do all the things, bad shit can happen. I don't know a single female identifying person that something horrible has not happened to.
Yeah. It's a pretty short list if there's anybody on it. 100%. When really the answer is like, just leave people alone. Like give it the Emma Coulter New York attitude. Yeah. And just fucking leave it alone.
I think a lot of problems would be solved if everyone just minded their own business and left people alone. Like when in doubt, that's what I always say. Like I hate all these, I don't know, there's been like videos and stuff going around, where they're like making fun of guys being like, oh, like, I'm so scared. Like you can't say anything anymore. And it's like, what were you going to do? Like, what were you going to do that now you can't do now? Just like when in doubt, just like leave people alone. Like don't touch people, period. Like just if you're so worried, just like, don't do it. Don't say the thing. Don't touch another human being without their permission. Like it's so just like stay on your side of the street and mind your own business. And it's, yeah.
Well, and my fascination with this and my eagerness to discuss it really comes from I liken it to this one experience that I had about one thing that as I get older seems to happen all the time with other shit, which is, I grew up moving around, but I mostly went to middle America, inner city public school, right? And when I was growing up in school, we had not very, but we had a culturally diverse classroom. There were black kids in my school, there were Jewish kids in my school, there were Mexican kids in my school. It wasn't New York City, it was Texas. So, I mean, we didn't have any like Ukrainian kids or any, there was definitely some, plenty of boxes that weren't checked, but it wasn't an all white classroom, like never. And we all got along. There was never issues when I was in elementary school about like, I'm not sitting here with him, he's black, or like, even as we got older, it was like I really don't remember race being a thing when I was in school ever. Like, I'm not saying it didn't happen. It definitely probably happened when I wasn't around. But as a white kid, I never observed any other like white kids beating up a Hispanic kid, calling him slurs or something. I never saw anything like that. So what I thought was going on was people my age aren't racist. It's just, we fixed it. This was happening subconsciously. I was like, one day my generation will be the older people and we won't really have these racial problems. Because look at me and all my friends who don't have any issues with each other. That sounds like an old people problem. And eventually the old people are going to die and we'll be the old people. And then we'll solve racism. This is my like naive mindset of not being aware of what's going on at all. But of also not observing any outright big issues where I was. Then I got older into my 20s, realized that was fucking insane. And there's lots of people my age that have super deep, not some hatred, but a lot of just ignorance about race and culture and all this stuff. And it blew my mind because I was like, didn't you used to sit next to me? You're the same guy. Remember, we went to school every day. We sat next to each other and we answered the same questions and we ate the same lunch and we did the same thing. And I'm growing up, never in my mind any hatred for anyone because they're like different or some shit. But yet you were sitting right next to me in class this whole fucking time, like, those motherfuckers, they're different and I got a problem with it. And it kind of broke my heart slowly, but also like blew my mind of like, fuck, I really thought we were fucking on that, And then when I saw like West Virginia and I'm like, you see the Charlottesville thing and you're like, wait, what? You guys are younger than me. What the fuck is going on? And it slowly happened with all these other things where I keep kind of like you're in the bubble of like, you think we have this under control where, it was a problem, but we're making progress and we're getting to like it being better. And before you know it, you barely even remember when it was fucked up. But it's like, there's these regular reminders that come back that are like, no, that kid who sat right next to you is the problem. And he's like 2 years younger than you. So if you're thinking he's going to die off, and like not be like, no, he's going to be your congressperson later. Like he's still involved. And I feel the same way about the issue we were just discussing about the sexual assault. I still to this day can't understand that some of the people that I have grown up with and even people I've called my friends statistically must have committed these acts against women, anybody. I'm like, no, fucking Tim sat next to me. I know Tim. He's a good guy. He doesn't hate anybody. He's not raping nobody. This is crazy. This is out of a movie, this shit you're talking about. And then to come of age and be like, you motherfucker, this whole time? How? We both went to the same assemblies. We both watched the same movies where the lesson is at the end, like, don't do this shit. And you're still out here causing the problems.
I think that's part of the conversation right now is just what you said. Like, he's such a good guy, And I feel like that's what did you see A Promising Young Woman?
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like, and I think,
Oh, that movie's so fucking good. Anyone listening to this who hasn't seen that, go watch A Promising Young Woman. It is great, and it's not very long. It's a very, very good movie.
Also, I just saw, I know I've been behind, but I just finished watching the show I May Destroy You. Have you seen that as well?
I haven't seen that one.
Ooh, definitely a recommendation also. One thing I love about that show is it looks at a lot of different versions of sexual assault and sexual violence.
Like different sides of the same story, or different
or just all of it, like
varieties,
different varieties and different sides. And it's astonishing. It's absolutely life-changing. But I do think also our awareness of what is and is not okay has shifted and gotten more nuanced, and thank God for that. And I think a lot of people my age, I guess our age, and I mean, we are the same age, but like, I don't know.
Pretty close, yeah.
Just, I feel like there's a lot of reckoning happening of like people who did things that were not okay, that at the time were considered okay. And it's like, oh yeah, that just happens sometimes. And now it's like, no, that was sexual assault. And we have vocabulary for things that we didn't have vocabulary for. And this idea of like enthusiastic consent. And I just think I'm really grateful that the conversation has become more nuanced and people are talking about these things. And I'm very excited that a lot of people who experience trauma are having like the statute of limitations lifted, at least for a short period of time, so they can come forward and hopefully get some closure and peace from things they've been struggling with their whole life.
I agree. Yeah, that's really important. And it's, I don't know, it's reassuring to see those things happen.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of people who were the perpetrator are scared because, they may have done things that they thought were okay because there were other people around them doing those things. And to an extent, I get that fear, and like, that must suck to have done something terrible, but you thought it was okay at the time, but it was still terrible. Like,
yeah.
I have a hard time believing someone does something like that and doesn't realize, unless they're an absolute psychopath, that it was not okay.
I agree if we're talking, and I just want to be specific as we get into this, because I want to agree with you wholeheartedly, but then I want to give this caveat to say that under circumstances where we're talking about true harm having been done, or especially if it's anywhere in the world of physical or sexual violence or anything having to do with even inappropriate touching and all that kind of shit, 100% I'm with you about everything you just said. The only thing that gets me a little bit on that is when we start to prosecute people for language that they used before language evolved and changed to accommodate being more sensitive, which I'm for. But if you said retarded like 10 years ago, I'm not mad at you. I'm just not.
Same. For me, that's my viewpoint on the whole kind of cancel culture conversation. Like, I don't think it's fair to hold someone accountable for things they said when at the time that was like a very socially acceptable way to
the intent should matter there.
Yeah.
Because that's the point of communication.
I think the issue is if someone's still using those words today and isn't able to say, that wasn't like, in today's context, I would never say that today, because we've collectively decided that's not appropriate anymore.
Sure.
I think language and action are very different. And I don't like, for me, I like jokingly refer to people like that as like the woke people, where just like, you can't see the bigger picture, and it's uncomfortable. Like, the world is full of amazing people who have done really fucked up shit. Like, top leaders who are inspirational to millions.
The greatest artists of all time.
Yes. And it's like, I think it takes a lot to be able to hold both and to be able to say those actions are absolutely unacceptable and not okay. And also this movement that person spearheaded changed the world. And thank God that they did that. And
Off the Wall is a really good album. It just is. It just is. And that's okay.
Yeah. And like, I think you can love someone's art, but not love them. And hold them accountable for their actions. Yeah, I
But
think I'm
Emma,
much more. Yeah,
I think truly, and first of all, I would say like I have so much respect for you for saying that and making that distinction, because I feel like there's a lack, it seems like, amongst the loudest people out there who want good liberal change for everybody, to be able to discern the difference between those two things. And that is what I think more than anything scares a lot of people, like you mentioned before about someone coming for them. If it's like a promising young woman situation, and for people who haven't seen that, I don't want to make it confusing, go watch it and I won't spoil it for you. But if it's in the world of sexual assault, if you've witnessed something that is a crime now, and then always has been a crime, if you witnessed a crime, you're not off the hook. And I don't care if it was, oh, hey, man, it was college, or hey, it was this, or hey, no. Period. End of story. Not especially, period. If it was a crime, and if it is a crime, that is its own separate thing. Saying certain words, especially when they're for a very long time, weren't considered offensive, some of them at all. And some of them weren't amongst white people, there's nothing offensive about saying the N-word for a really long time. You could just say it and you wouldn't get in any trouble. It wasn't a problem. Then it became one. We all agreed that's...
Was it though?
Amongst other white people. Yeah.
I guess in certain I don't know the history of that, but I don't feel like it was ever like a neutral word.
It was not colored automatically with hate, except for the fact that it was using that word to describe a group of people that they didn't consider human, which is a problem. But it wasn't like they were trying to point out that that's the case necessarily. When they're using it was a commonplace word for that situation. That's not okay. I'm not backing that up or saying that that's how it should work. And I'm probably speaking ignorantly on the subject because I wasn't there and it's not a word that's in my vocabulary. So I don't know the history of it either. But my point is, there comes a time when the majority collectively agree that we're going to retire a piece of language because of the harm it does. And from that point forward, it's like the pot law thing. It's like at one point pot wasn't illegal, and then it was, and now it's starting to not be. While it's a crime, these are the rules. Then when it changes, these are the rules. And if you can't roll with the rules, you're going to get in some trouble about it. But we're not going to come for you when you did it when it was fucked up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the language evolves, and we do it because after a while of so many uses in a certain way, it starts to cause harm. That's what triggers us to all say, yeah, we're going to have to put this on the shelf because it doesn't do what it should do anymore. And we want to be clear about what you mean when you use that word.
Yeah. And
because it's going to point in the direction.
I think language is forever evolving, and I think it's great when a group of people who reclaim a word. I feel like that happens a lot in the queer community. Even the word queer, I feel like has been reclaimed, and I think that's beautiful. And
yes,
I just think it's important to take the lead from whoever has been most impacted by that word. You know what I mean? Like
absolutely,
if someone
right.
wants to be referred to as unhoused rather than homeless, I think it's just good to come to situations generously and graciously and gratefully of thank you. Thank you for communicating that you would like me to, or pronouns. Thank you for letting me know that these are the pronouns you would like me to use. And great, let's move on with our day. I think I understand some people perhaps older are a little thrown by all of the language changes, because I feel like there have
those young people who don't get it either.
I think things are changing perhaps at a more rapid speed because of social media and how fast information flies and stuff. But I don't know. I mean, I think the language thing is tricky. And I also don't think that I don't know. I don't agree with the idea of completely shutting someone off from what they've said. I mean, I think if they're a sexual predator, I think they probably do deserve to never have an opportunity to do anything ever again. But I'm pretty extreme on my viewpoint regarding those sorts of things.
Sure.
But I don't think it's helpful if you shut a conversation down to the point where there's no room for learning and changing and growing and being able to say, I messed up. I shouldn't have done that. Thank you for letting me know. I'm going to do better next time. Like, I think that kind of level of conversation and empathy really needs to happen more. And I do worry just with how divided everything has gotten, that there's less of that. There's more of blaming and shaming, and just shame is not effective. It's not effective for change. It just kind of like shuts people down. But yeah, I don't know. Whenever I'm like, is this situation fucked up? I always tell people to just like flip the genders. Just flip the genders and see. Because that usually for me makes it really clear, because there's so many things I have just accepted as, oh, that's the way it is. And then if you switch, you're like, that is insane. Like, no, absolutely not.
My wife and I say that all the time when we watch like reality TV. And then the question will come up of like, is this a toxic relationship? And we do that all the time. We like flip the genders around and we're like, well, she almost hits him a lot. What if he almost hit her a lot? Would we be like, I don't know, he gets carried away? Or would we be like, that's fucked up, and why are they just standing there filming it? Like, I think you have to take it case by case, but then you can kind of apply the same very simple ethical ideas to each one and find out pretty quickly, like, what's going on.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about the accent thing.
Yes.
So talk to me about the accent project. What is it?
Okay, so the Accent Project is my business. I have a business being a dialect coach, and I work with people individually, primarily actors, but I've recently branched out to other professionals who, mostly for them, kind of working on accent modification. And sometimes if English is not their first language, having English be a little bit less influenced by the other languages they speak. But with actors, I've also worked on productions, theater, film, TV.
Hold on 1 second, because I want to clarify. That's very interesting to me. So you're working with actors on accents for projects where they play characters that don't speak like they do. Great. That seems easy for my brain to understand. Let's talk about the other group of people that you talked about. You said there's some people who English is not their first language, but basically they want to, can we say, Americanize their accent a little bit, or they want to sound less foreign as they speak to people. How did that come up, and what do you do with those folks? I mean, I can kind of understand how you might get into it.
I mean, I don't love the word foreign. I don't love the term. I don't feel like we don't have sufficient language to talk about this. And that's something that I've been talking about within the accent and dialect community, because there are people who were born in America and don't sound like your average American. And then it's like, what does average mean? Like a lot of these conversations are happening
Mary
right now.
used to say, nobody has an accent, everybody has a voice. I love that. Agreed.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess for me, I feel like everyone has their individual accent. And even if you're from the same city, two people can have completely different voices, accents, whatever you'd like to say.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I'm newer to this area. And I think in the past, there's been a way that it's been a little bit toxic, where it is a bit more like accent reduction. And this idea of there's a good way to sound and a bad way to sound. And I do think that's changing a lot, particularly in the acting industry. But I think it ties into just opportunities at the same time. And I think it's a fine line for me of like, when working with a client, I'm very careful to just make sure that they have pride in their original accent or however they speak English. And there's nothing wrong with the way they speak. I think that's really important because, I mean, I just think historically a lot of shame has been used to other people who might not sound like a general American.
But with that said, then why make any changes at all?
Yeah. I mean, I personally think it's nice when people just rock their individual accent, but there is a desire to do that. There is a desire to sound.
You're like
a
Dr.
bit more.
Kevorkian. You're like, you shouldn't kill yourself. And they're like, but I really want to. And he's like, I'll help you. But I'm telling you, you shouldn't fucking do it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think there's a need, there's a desire there. And I also do want to honor like the real reality is that some people who might sound a bit more stereotypically American might have more opportunities available to them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you mentioned that before. That makes a lot of sense. We don't love it, but it's true.
Yeah. And I do think it's changing, thankfully. But I think, again, it's kind of like finding that balance between acknowledging the world we do, in fact, live in and what those barriers might be, while also finding a way to kind of, I think what it is really is about choice of like choosing in a certain space, perhaps if you're in a job interview, maybe kind of using more American sounds than whatever your like L1 is, your first language sounds are. But again, like some people just want to completely like sound just like they were born and raised in America and like kind of what you'd think of watching any sort of American TV show. So I'm really interested in it. It's a very sensitive, delicate work. It's very vulnerable, I've found. So I am drawn to it in that like I really enjoy creating safe spaces and trying to really empower people and encourage people. And I think a lot of, honestly, even when an actor is working on an accent, a lot of it is just kind of being a cheerleader and like encouraging them and giving them a lot of positive reinforcement. Because I do feel like oftentimes, I know I've personally experienced it where there's kind of like a right way and a wrong way to do things.
Right.
And I tried to, I studied with KT Speechwork, and something that I really like about what they're doing is like, it's not, this is the accent. It's like, this is the general target that we're going towards, but it's a conversation. It's like, okay, you want to learn, I don't know, an Australian accent. So here, let me give you a few different samples of different Australian voices. And which one do you like? Let me help you get as close to that target as we can get. And encouraging what is working rather than like, this is the right way to say this word and this is the wrong way to say this word. And that kind of
That is totally the right attitude, because it's like you said, that nuance is what gives people voices. And you don't want to teach every person who like comes to you and is like, I need to know a British accent. You teach them, everyone gets Idris Elba. You're like, fucking, that's not the right thing for everything.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of that's been my approach. Like I like to say it's tailor-made accent work, where like I like to take into account someone's gender identity, their racial background, their ethnic background, their age, because I think it's important to work from samples of people that look like you. That might not be exactly your lived experience, but at least it's kind of that like Michelle Obama, like you got to see it to be it. And I feel that way with accents, where like it might, I've heard from some people that it can be alienating, you know, if the whole class or the whole whatever, the whole production is given this one sample and that person might have a completely different identity from you. And that can be kind of hard to then make that accent your own, which I think is when the real work is successful. So
you're helping people who, let's say, you know, we'll use words that you hate. They want to clean up their American English and make it nice and recognizable, nice and American. So if you're helping people like that sometimes, how do you feel about, let's just say it, I'll make it simple, Americans who have a regional dialect and they move somewhere else and they just start speaking like where they're from? So example, right? I think it can go a couple of different ways. Like, let's say you have someone who's from Kansas. They have a kind of very general American, not really the South, but you're just not really Midwestern. It's just kind of general standard. And then they move to New York and they're so in love with the Brooklyn, like Italian accent. And they live there for like 10 years. And then they go home and they're like, everyone's like, why are you talking like you're from fucking Goodfellas? Like, what's going on with you? And also, then there's the other example, and I'll let you kind of talk about both. The person who's from like Boston, who's a very distinct Massachusetts, Boston accent, then they move to somewhere like Las Vegas or Portland or somewhere that's just a little bit more general, not as notable. And everywhere they go, someone's like, Boston. And they finally are like, fuck it. I don't want to sound like this anymore. I'm going to go take Emma's classes and get rid of this Boston shit. And now I walk around and people are like, oh, he's just the guy. Like, do you have feelings or thoughts about people wanting to just change that up for whatever reason?
Of course. I mean, I feel like for the second example, it breaks my heart a little bit.
You want them
And
proud to
it's
be Bostonian.
well, it breaks my heart when anyone for any reason feels ousted and then feels like who they are is wrong in some way and therefore needs to change
True
an
shit.
integral part of themselves to like fit in. It's just, it's sad,
Yeah,
I think,
yeah, that
regardless
sucks.
of what that is.
I'm gonna agree on that.
I from an acting point perspective, I think it's just useful from a business standpoint to be able to do different accents. Like if you have a very strong Boston accent, I think it's good because all the characters you audition for are probably not going to be from Boston. So if you want to play somebody who is, I don't know, like from Texas or from the Midwest, maybe you're auditioning for a Midwestern news anchor that has a very kind of that voice. I think it's important to be able to do that. Just the same way it is important as an actor to be able to play somebody who maybe is evil, if you're a really nice person, to be flexible in that way. I think in terms of the first example that you gave, I think that's just how things work from my understanding, like just linguistically. I think it's very rare to find someone that's like very specific just to that region unless they've only lived there ever. But right. I mean, we do that. We're influenced by our surroundings. So like if you're from the South and then you live most of your life up north, you're probably going to pick up those sounds, even if it's not conscious.
So you would judge the people in Kansas when that person goes home and they're like, oh, look at Mr. Robert De Niro over here. It's like, just let him talk how he talks. That's how he talks now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really judge it. I mean, I think it depends on the example. I do think it's a little silly when there's like Americans that move to England for like a year and then they come back and like have a British accent. Like that feels weird, but I guess it's case by case. I don't know. I think that's a little funny.
How long do you have to live there for us to be like, okay, it rubbed off on you? And then how long is like, you took a 3-month vacation to Ireland and now you're like, like, come on, man.
Yeah. I mean, it's
what do you think? What's the line? Is it 4 years? Is it 6?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't really have a standard. And I'm interested because there are also people who are bi-dialectical. That's something I learned recently. I'm trying to remember her name, but from Sex Education, the mom, and then she's also in The Crown. Do you know what I'm talking about? Ugh, I can't remember her name, but she's dialectical. She was born, I think, in the UK.
It's a real mouthful.
I know. And then moved to the States and lived there for like 7 years, but then moved back. And so when she's speaking to Americans, will have an American accent. And then when she's in the UK, she'll have an English accent. And it's interesting. But
do then we call that code switching?
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be part of code switching. And I think it's the same way where like when I go home and I'm talking to the lady at like, the biscuit drive-through or whatever, like some of my twang's probably going to come out because again, we're social creatures. We want to connect. So I think it's just part of human nature that we kind of, as you said, code switch.
What do you think of the people, like I said, like that Kansas chick who's like, who calls those people fake? And they're like, oh, that's a fake accent because I saw her the other day on London Today or whatever. I don't know the shows, but like, and she had a thick, and now she's over here in Maryland talking like us, but like, and here's why I say this, because I do want to get your opinion on this. I grew up in Texas with a mom who hated the fact that we had Southern accents in the family. She was like worried that I would sound country, as we called it. And she was trying to do what some of your clients have done with me as I was growing up, which is like get the country out. Even when he spends time with the family or goes to a family reunion or grandma's house or whatever, he's going to come back talking about can't and ain't and ain't. And she's like, no. She would correct me all the time. I would regularly get like, not in trouble, but I would get called out by my mom all the time for like, don't use these words or don't, fix your grammar. And she's not ashamed of the fact that that's why she did it. She was like, I didn't want you to sound stupid, It was like, I want you to have all the opportunity in life, and I don't want you going into an interview being like, well, I'm from Texas. And like, so I've never had a Southern accent my whole life because my mom was like, don't have one. And when I was a kid, I was obsessed with like stand-up comedy and just film and TV in general. Loved voices. I was always mimicking and doing impressions. So then when I got to my 20s and I started traveling around a lot, I found I would, I swear to God, subconsciously, I would pick up the dialect of wherever I was in a few weeks. Like I didn't mean to. I wasn't doing it. And then people who knew me would see me later and be like, why do you talk like that? And I was like, what are you talking about? And then they would mimic what I had just been doing. And I would be like, I don't sound like that. And they're like, no, when you talk to that guy, you sound this way. And when you talk to this guy, you sound like someone else. One of the main things that stuck with me my whole life, for example, I get this like kind of slight New York accent, which I only lived there twice in my life, teenager and 20s, when I'm angry. Like when people are fucking with me, I'm like, you fucking motherfucker. I start to get like, I swear to God. And all of a sudden I start tapping little like consonants and stuff like that. And I was telling my wife on our podcast a few weeks ago, I was like, I think it's because when I was a kid, tough guys in movies from the South sounded like idiots. And tough guys from New York were going to fuck you up.
Yeah.
And so I just took on like, if I start getting like, did you touch my fuck? Like it just immediately, and I'm from Texas. It makes no sense. Yeah. But I wonder, I've always defended, to get back to my question to you, I've always defended that I'm not doing it to like get people to like me on a conscious level. I'm not trying to like wear their clothes so they'll think I'm one of them. I'm not trying to fake it. It just rubs off on me really quickly. And I think if I spent a year in London, it would be there. I'd be that guy 100%. Now, when I came back to New York, I wouldn't be like, oh, I'm sorry, terribly. I didn't mind if I, like, I wouldn't fucking be doing it when I came home. But you can bet that I would be like, there'd be people in London being like, I'm sorry, where are you from? You sound like, I'm not really sure where you're, what is that? And I'd be like, oh, I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm sorry. I didn't even realize I was doing it.
Well, there's a word for that. I can't remember at the top of my head, but there's actually a word to describe. It's something that some people have where it's a subconscious thing. Whenever they're talking, whoever they're talking to, they start kind of talking in the same accent.
If you figure out what that word is, text it
I can
to
look
me.
it up.
I'm already writing down
I'll
by
let you know.
dialectical.
So you probably have that.
Maybe.
I think I was a little bit like that as a kid. I do think, again, it's part of our desire, whether it's conscious or not, to connect and to not feel other. And I mean, I do that consciously sometimes when I'm traveling, like, especially if I'm in like London or something. Like for me, I feel like my American accent sticks out so much. And so if it's just like a kind of transactional interaction, like I'll sometimes just put on a little bit of a thing so that I'm not getting the like, and just kind of like, just Emma, to let things flow better.
I do that. I've never been to the UK in my whole life, but I do that. This is real. This is totally real. So like after school, the arts, because we all had to learn like 4 different versions of fucking British. It was pretty reasonably strong British accent. And I started doing it years ago, and I finally told my wife about it. I was like, I didn't even realize I was really doing this the first few times I did it. And now I've realized I do it all the time, which is when I'm traveling and I'm not anywhere near home. And I'm like when I went to like Puerto Rico, or I'm like in the middle of the country and driving through Nevada or something. And if you encounter me like in the wild at like a retail store or a gas station, I'm English, because I found people are nicer to me.
Yeah.
If you're a little confused and out of your element and British, people are like, oh, he's clearly not from here. Let me help him get his thing. And I'm like, oh, I'm so terribly sorry. I'm so, like very Hugh Grant in the 90s. It's like, oh, like bumbling. I can't believe it. It's a go-to.
It's very fascinating to me. I used to do that at some of my survival jobs. Like when I first moved to New York, I've never like pretended to be someone I'm not, like, especially you can't get away with that in New York because there will be someone like, oh, where are you from? But I've done that in a way when like, you're getting off like the tube in London or something and you're just like, excuse me, or thank you. Like I'm sometimes I'll just put on a little bit of an accent just so that I'm not drawing attention. But I sometimes will like mess with people. And I was doing that when I was at a serving job once. or I think it was food. I think it was a catering job, and I was food passing, and I was really bored. And so what I did is every time I'd go out, I would use a different accent just to see how I was perceived and if people react differently. And yes, people love a British accent. People, but it also, I guess, depends where you are. So in New York, people love a British accent. They kind of like if you do like a Russian accent. They really don't like a Southern accent. And obviously this is mass generalization, but the people I was with, but it's interesting, you know, just
my mom was right.
Yeah. And I think, you know, to that point, like, I think your mom is smart. Like, I think it's sad that yes, there are very intelligent people who have very strong Southern accents, and they are often underestimated because of their accent and what a lot of pop culture has decided about a Southern accent. Right. That breaks my heart. And there's some truth to it. And so I feel like it's smart to be able to do a different accent. And I do hope, but I do think it's changing, like with globalization and stuff. I feel like it's changing because and with social media, because you're having people who actually have that lived experience talking about their experience. And so we're getting firsthand accounts of like, oh, that's not true. Whereas before we just had actors kind of portraying this stereotype of all these different people.
And we had presidents with Southern accents for like 30 years.
That's true. Yeah.
Because like we had Bush, and then before that we had Bill Clinton, and they both have like notably Southern accents.
Oh my God, that's really true. Yeah.
And then before that we had other George Bush, who is kind of a weird Southern mix. Ronald Reagan thought he was a cowboy, so that counts. And then we had Jimmy Carter. So that's like, you know, that's almost Jimmy 50 Carter. Years of the leadership of America sounding Southern, and everyone being like, don't fucking sound Southern. They'll think you're dumb. Yeah. You'll never achieve anything.
Yeah. I mean, I felt that. As a kid, I was very mindful to, you know, the whole, like, if you like, what's a, like P, like something you write with, that's not a pencil. Like it's a pen. Not a pin. Right. And so I would do that, which is like so stupid. But
those are some of the ones I had to get at school. I definitely had a pen thing that got cleared up at School of the Arts, but my big ones were like grammatical.
Oh, okay.
Like we ain't gonna do that. That's the kind of stuff people in my family. I love it too, and I put it back in.
And y'all, I've
gone back and forth on y'all.
I love y'all because it's way better than saying you guys. And in terms of the whole like transgender, non-binary conversation,
that covers it.
It's much better because it's like a nosotros. Like we don't have that in English. So I feel like
that's
y'all.
True.
Is that right? Vosotros or nosotros?
I don't know. Nosotros with an N.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool. I know there's both, and I couldn't remember what's the equivalent of y'all, but I remember like I like it because it's inclusive. But I wish
in Texas Spanish class they had just said that. That was a great parallel.
I learned that from Spanish class. I think one of my Spanish teachers pointed that out.
I took Spanish in Texas, and no one was like, man, that would have made more sense. I'm over here trying to conjugate. Turns out I've already been doing it.
Yep, there you go.
Emma, thank you so much for talking to me. I had such a good time chatting with you today.
Thanks for having me. It's been really fun talking to you.
It was super, super good. We talked about so many things I did not expect us to talk about at all.
I got deep.
I told you I don't plan anything. I already knew you were from Atlanta, and that was my only question. So everything else you brought to the table, I blame you for everything we talked about. If anyone has any issues with anything we talked about, or you want to lodge any complaints, Emma Coulter, ladies and gentlemen, hit her up. Let her know.
Great.
Oh, it's gonna be fine. You're so progressive and inclusive, and all those words you said. No one's gonna have any problem with you. I'm the problem. Look at this problem.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's been fun.